Welcome to the Progressive Era. This is Standard 14, so we're moving in from the Gilded Age to the Progressive Era, where people are starting to notice industrialization is causing some problems in society that are going to need to be addressed. That's going to have to do with working conditions, how products are created, labor laws, how we treat the environment, and so on. So, in this standard, we're looking at Standard 13A, B, C, and D. It said 14 earlier, I think. That was a typo. So in this first video, we're going to look at Standard A, and you should be able to describe the influence of muckrakers on affecting change by bringing attention to social problems. So when you're going to have to identify who muckrakers are, what they do, and then you're going to have to describe the influence that they have on bringing attention to the social problems that we see in society. So, again, when you look at your notes in these PowerPoints, keep in mind that those items that are in purple or a pinkish color are your vocabulary words, and that which is in yellow is the notes that you need to be writing down. You need to have something to go back to study. So the Progressive Era is a time period in U.S. history. It's the late 1800s into the early 1900s, and we're not talking about 1914. We're talking about just before that. Okay, so the late 1800s, after the Civil War, after Reconstruction, into the early 1900s. This is a time where political reform and social reform are going to strengthen American democracy because people are going to have a voice. They're going to influence legislation and politicians and leaders to bring about change in society to address the problems that they see. All right, so for your vocabulary terms, we already covered Progressive Era, so you need to put that in your vocab sheet, which you're going to turn into teams. Muckrakers is the next term, and a muckraker is really like they're digging up the mud. They're digging up the dirt to uncover corruption that exists in society. So these are journalists, people who write, be it they write magazines, journal articles in the newspaper, or they write books. And it's going to be something that brings attention to those problems in society to the masses. A lot of problems that really people tend to ignore or just not look at or turn a blind eye to. So 3 famous muckrakers that we're going to look at. We're going to look at Upton Sinclair, and he wrote a book called The Jungle. Ida Tarbell wrote against the Standard Oil Trust. Remember, that's John D. Rockefeller, okay? Philanthropist, robber baron, entrepreneur. And then Jacob Riis is going to talk about tenement housing and the fact that you have so many poor people living in one small space, which creates sanitation and hygiene problems, spreads disease faster, people go hungry. Look at all 3 of those, all right? Upton Sinclair's the first one that we want to look at. Here's a picture of what the meatpacking plant looked like. He wrote a book called The Jungle, and The Jungle was designed to expose dangerous working conditions in the meatpacking industry. There were no windows, there was no ventilation, there were no safety procedures in place, and the working conditions were incredibly dangerous. It'd be a good idea to check that book out of the library if you ever get a chance. You may not want to eat hot dogs again, but it talks about piles of meat left on the floor, rats running across it, pooping on the meat, and then they'll package it up and sell it. The boiling vats where they boil down the skin and the bones and things like that, and workers falling in and being boiled to death or boiled alive and still packed up with the meat. So, no ventilation, people losing their hands in the machines, losing fingers and limbs. And Upton Sinclair's goal was to bring these horrible working conditions to light, to the view or the attention of policymakers and legislators to make working conditions safer in these factories. However, even though members of Congress at the time read his book, and even the president read his book, it wasn't about working conditions that they saw. They saw how horrible the meatpacking was, and how dangerous that was to consumers. So the FDA was created as a result, the Food and Drug Administration, to ensure that meat was being packaged and sold that was safe and of good quality and it wouldn't hurt consumers. Working conditions will be addressed later, though. Ida Tarbell, okay, she write article about exposing Standard Oil's unfair business practices. She's going to write about their bribery, how they manipulated the system, their cutthroat tactics. Here's even a cartoon that shows Rockefeller sitting on top of it, and he's like king of the world kind of thing. Remember, his is a monopoly. And in 1906, as a result of her articles that will expose all these business practices, the federal government's going to prosecute Standard Oil Trust, and it's going to break up the company. So they can't, manipulate and exploit consumers, and they can't manipulate and exploit the markets. Okay, so Ida Tarbell is very important as well. And then the third muckraker we're looking at is, I need to get my video adjusted. Okay, is John Reese, and he wrote a book called How the Other Half Lives. A lot of times when things are out of sight, they're out of mind. We don't think about it. So when people are living in incredibly poor conditions, we don't see it, so we don't think about it. But if you can see down here, this picture on the right, all of this stuff is packed up into one little room, and you've got a couple of families living in one small space. All right, and if you look at this picture up top, again, it's a couple of families living in one room. There's one little bed, and then one crib, one closet, one little area to prepare food. Okay, so not only is this incredibly uncomfortable and creates the spread of disease, but it's incredibly unsanitary conditions. That's where we get the word slums, okay? John Reese's work led to the creation of municipal housing codes. So basically urban housing codes where housing had to be up to a certain standard so that people could live in a safe environment. And areas in the cities had to begin providing water and sewer to pull the stuff that was coming from the toilets and whatnot away from the homes and provide clean drinking water and things like that. We're going to stop there.